Summary. I am a Tully and a Stark, she wanted to say. The river is in me. The north runs in my veins. I will freeze before I drown, and I will live before the water swallows me, and you cannot stop me. Chapter 2. Lannister. Jon sighed. Is this really necessary, Sansa? Sansa shot him a quelling look over her shoulder. Yes, she said. If you find it so painful, you can leave, Jon. I've Lady to keep me safe. And the Godswood isn't terribly dangerous either. That's not what I meant. All I'm doing is dyeing my hair. Sansa rolled her eyes. Nothing painful, nothing terrifyingly difficult. I still don't get why. People will remember this color, she said impatiently, which Jon thought was justified. He had been whining, and she might very well have explained this before, while he didn't pay attention. And the Lannisters mustn't find anything about me to remember. It isn't so bad. What does Robb think? Jon asked. The cold anger on Sansa's face when she heard that almost made him flinch. Robb isn't my keeper, she told him, icily formal. And I'll thank you not to act like I'm simply a puppet. Now stay if you can be quiet, or go back to Winterfell. Jon sighed again and slumped against the weirwood trunk, feeling the rough bark scrape against his back. I like your hair as it is, he told her. That's the point. Sansa rolled her eyes, plucking the skinful of walnut shell filtrate from its position beside her. I cannot be beautiful when they come, and I cannot dye my hair the night before if anyone is to believe me, so I will do it now. After a moment, her eyes softened. I don't mean it other than that, Jon. This isn't anywhere near as painful as things we'll have to do soon. You won't be doing anything painful. Jon sat up straight, back stiff and angry. Not a single thing, Sansa. This isn't your dream world. I'm here, and you will be safe beside me. Do you hear me? She didn't look so dubious as she had years ago, but Sansa's eyes did narrow slightly, irritably. Again, not the point. And what is the bloody point? That I'm doing this and you can't stop me. So either be quiet, Jon, or go back to Winterfell. I'm sure Arya will want to spar with you, if you've the time. It was Jon's turn to roll his eyes. Over the years, Arya's resentment of Sansa's claim on Jon's time had grown, and she had grown more and more impatient with Jon so much as looking at Sansa. Thankfully enough, Sansa hadn't done much more than laugh when she heard. Though she refrained from teasing Arya about jealousy, she hadn't offered any of that courtesy to Jon. Robb, as usual, found the whole thing hilarious. The afternoon sun warmed Jon's chest as he napped. Sansa woke him when she was finished, and they headed back to Winterfell. When she saw his suspicious looks at her hair, which was still bright red, if only a little darker than before, Sansa sighed. It'll take time to darken. Jon looked at her and then reached out and tugged a curl that had escaped her single braid. I can wait, he told her, and new affection suffused his voice. You'll have to, Sansa replied tartly, but her face softened. We've time, he said instead of the 1,000 other things crowding his tongue. Don't silence yourself before you must, Sansa. I couldn't bear it if you dashed. Jon paused, feeling heat rush to his face along with the old urge to protect. She sighed then, looking simultaneously impatient and fond. I don't want to, she said. I like my hair, and I like to talk, and I don't want to let it go. But there are things that, if we don't do, can kill us. And seeing any of you die will kill me, so I will do what has to be done. I will cut my hair off if necessary. I will learn how to kill a man. I will do 100 other things I don't want to do because the alternative is a nightmare. Her words had started calm enough, but by the end, she was flushed and, while not shouting, her words were emphatic and as bee-stinged sharp as with Arya all those years back before he knew what she knew and admired her for it. Under the too bright afternoon haze, Jon thought he could see the woman she would become, all fierce and kind and beautiful, determinedly, heartbreakingly strong. And, he said, willing her to look at him, willing her to see the promise in his eyes, the truth. I swear to you that I will be there beside you. The king's retinue came in a long winding line, just as Sansa remembered. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she felt a strange mixture of fear and anger. Her hands were unclenched though, and when King Robert Baratheon stepped forward, reeking of wine and horse sweat, Sansa did not let a single one of her muscles tighten, did not allow a single ounce of her rage and grief and defiance to show. "Your Majesty," she said, dipping into a low curtsy. When she rose, the king smiled at her, said, "You're a pretty one," and moved on. A moment later, Cersei Lannister stepped out of a carriage, and what had seemed manageable with the king appeared an insurmountable task against her. The queen, the woman who watched as Ned Stark died, the woman who made Sansa's life a living hell. Sansa curtsied once more, but couldn't find words to speak. Her eyes were trained on the ground, and she saw the queen's skirts come closer. Her fingers tightened on her skirts almost involuntarily, but Sansa held her position, and Cersei moved on without pause. She unfolded out of her curtsy just in time to see Joffrey step forward. The world went white for a moment, for a heartbeat. It reassembled almost instantly, and she managed to pull up a tremulous smile for him when Joffrey smiled at her with a sorry twitch of his wormy lips. She felt a sudden, abrupt movement from Robb. Instinctively, she wrapped her hand around his upper arm. Just in time, too. Had she been a half second later, Robb might have actually leapt at him, and that would have been well, disaster wasn't the right word, something far worse than a disaster. "Robb," she bit out. His muscles flexed under her hand, but she didn't let go, she only tightened her grip until he hissed in pain. They had moments before they'd be noticed, moments before everyone started wondering what was wrong with the air. "Calm down, please just calm down." It wasn't Sansa who stopped him in the end. Jon shifted, just enough for both of them to be aware of the rasp of his scabbard against his leg, and that seemed to jolt Robb back to reality. The idea that, if he attacked the Crown Prince of Westeros, Jon would follow without hesitation, though it be death for them both. The rest of the greetings passed quickly enough, though it was through a milky haze of both rage and hurt. Sansa felt alternately numb and raw, her cheeks flushed against her furs and her fingers twitching for the uncomfortable weight of a sword. They dispersed once the last of the people had passed through with strict instructions to be ready for the feast during supper. Sansa waited just long enough for the majority of people to leave, just long enough to find a modicum of privacy for the three of them, before unleashing her wrath. Robb had fucked up. He knew this. Jon knew this too, but he was too aware of his bastardy to upbraid Robb as he deserved. Sansa, who had a tongue sharper than any sword when needed and no reason to temper it, was the one who actually snapped at him, in the eaves between the stables, face just a few shades lighter than her hair. "What was that?" "A mistake," Robb replied, bowing his head. "I'm sorry, Sansa." "No," she snapped. No. You don't get to make mistakes like that, Robb. Gods damn you." If Jon hadn't been there, what do you think might have happened? You're even luckier that Grey Wind wasn't there, because he would have taken Joffrey's throat. Damn all the consequences. We have to be more patient than they. We have to do better than them. We have to survive. And you cannot kill all of us because you fall into some protective rage. Why don't we all just... Jon actually stumbled back a half step when Sansa turned on him, eyes flashing. "And you," she said cuttingly. "What did you think you were doing? What did you think that if Robb actually went into battle, you'd follow him? That if he died, you'd die too?" Both of them had seen Sansa angry, sometimes painfully so, but never to this extent. This isn't anger, Robb thought, piecing the truth together slowly. This is betrayal. "That's not what I..." "No, because you didn't think. Neither of you used a single part of your brain, and the only reason nothing happened was luck." She drew herself up, eyes cold and empty as Rob had seen only once before, when she first ran into his rooms in the night, weeping and choking on 6 deaths she couldn't forget. It hurt his heart to see. "I have to go. John, keep Arya away from me tonight. I cannot handle her. Not now. Rob, keep Bran beside you and don't let him leave your sight." Her eyes swept over them both, again, and then she left just as quickly, just as quietly as she dragged them there. "She's angry," Rob said. John didn't answer, but his expression spoke volumes. "You think that's obvious?" "A bit, yeah," John retorted. "I mean, I couldn't tell from her shouting at both of us, or looking as red as her hair, or from the fact that she's basically ensured we don't spend any time with her for the entire feast. But yes, tell me your insights, Rob, please." Rob exhaled sharply and rested his weight against the wooden eave. "Don't get short. It doesn't suit you." Rob. "We'll do what she says because we messed up," Rob interrupted. "And we'll apologize until we're blue in the face. But you need to know why she's so angry, and it's because she thinks I chose you over her," John finished, looking suddenly weary. "Because she's terrified of being alone," he corrected. "Though that's a part of it, too." After a pause, John levered himself to his feet, mouth pursed in distaste. "Gods, this is tiring. How much longer do we have to do this?" Rob gave a short, humorless laugh. "The rest of our lives, according to Sansa. Personally, I'm hoping to calm things down in 10 years. If the gods smile down on us 10 different ways and we get lucky 100 other," John replied wryly. "And even then it's a maybe." "We're too young for this," said Rob. "Maybe," John murmured, "but we're the only ones for this too." "God save us." John nodded, looking lost in his own thoughts, and left. Rob followed him out after some time. Rob had messed up, and now he'd pay the price for it gladly, to Sansa, to John, to anyone they deemed necessary. They were family, they worked together, and no Dan Lannister would ever be able to come between them. In the cool wind of the courtyard, more horses and men ran about than any in recent history. Rob breathed in, breathed out, lifted his chin high, and let the full weight of being air fall on his shoulders once more. "I've a son," said Robert, "and you've a daughter, Ned, a beautiful one, at that. Pity her hair so north dark. It'd have been better if she had Catelyn's hair, but any man will want her once she's flowered." "Robert," Ned said, and meant it as a protest. The friend he'd once had might not have balked at saying such things about girls, but young Robert would never have dreamt of speaking of Ned's daughter in such blunt terms. But this Robert Baratheon was king for over a decade, and fat with indulgence and whores, Ned's protests would go unheard if he wasn't just as blunt as Robert. "I mean it," Robert said. "Think on it. Joffrey's young yet, and you can stay in King's Landing while they're married. It's a good idea, Ned, joining our 2 houses." Ned sighed. "I'll talk to her, Robert. I'll need some time, though. You can't just tell me this the night before." "You want to keep her in Winterfell," Robert boomed. "This castle will freeze her to her bones." "Gods, Ned, I'm still shivering. I knew there was a reason I didn't come north." There would have been a time earlier in the day when Ned might have taken offense. Now he was moving past that and straight into a tired irritation that seemed to be the only response he could have for his oldest friend. "We'll see," he offered, and that was that. When her father asked her if she wished to marry Joffrey, Sansa didn't hesitate to say that, whoever he wished to betroth her to, she refused to marry until she turned 18. "Mother was that age when she married you," she told him firmly. "I wish to be no younger when I do the same." "Very well," he said, and though Sansa could see that he was surprised, he did accept it. For the rest of her life, they never spoke of it. Sansa avoided Jon and Robb for a week by keeping her head down and disappearing into the shadowed corridors that were yet to be furnished. Her head ached when she remembered that all-encompassing rage, but her heart ached even worse. All she wanted was to move on, but not at the cost of making the same mistake again. If Robb decided that he hated Joffrey and was going to kill him, he would die. If he sank into the same old rage, Sansa would be forced to watch him die under a Kingsguard's sword, and then Sansa would die just as surely as Robb would. So she kept her distance. She wasn't ready to confront them, either of them. Neither was she ready to confront her emotions. If she allowed herself to indulge in the fears swirling beneath her breastbone, she would drown, and she was only just treading water. "I am a Tully and a Stark," she wanted to say. "The river is in me. The north runs in my veins. I will freeze before I drown, and I will live before the water swallows me, and you cannot stop me." It was a week later that Robb finally caught her in the Godswood. His eyes looked older than ever before. There was repentance along the slump of his shoulders and an apology written across the clench of his hands. Sansa closed her eyes, thought, "We do not turn our heads," and stepped forward to tell him why she was angry. Sansa stepped forward and raised her chin and decided, as steady as a storm-ridden weirwood tree, to forgive him. Bran did not fall this time. Sansa had told Robb what happened. Jaime Lannister lay with his sister in the tower, and Bran climbed it and saw them, and then the Kingslayer pushed Bran out of the window. Bran was crippled ever after. Sansa didn't know anything beyond that, because she left before Bran awoke, only that there was an assassin who spouted Lannister names and a bitter, cold thing in her brother's heart for being a cripple ever after. Robb kept Bran beside him. Sansa had never seen either of them so exasperated with each other. Usually Robb lived and let live. He didn't interfere so much in small, regular affairs. That he was being so strict with Bran was something difficult for him to do, as well as for Bran to accept. Sansa laughed when she saw their faces. Despite being so different in coloring, both Robb and Bran managed to wear identical expressions of grumpiness. "You're finding this hilarious," Robb accused as he escorted her back to her chambers from yet another feast. Bran was asleep, as was Rickon. There was no one in the hallways, and both took advantage of the privacy. "Of course," Sansa replied. "I've to take my amusement from somewhere, right? We'll have little enough to laugh about soon." "Must you bring that up?" he asked sharply, all levity gone from his face. Sansa would have sighed if she wanted a fight. Robb was old beyond his years, and she sometimes felt she took advantage of that. Who else could have borne the news of his own impending death, of his family's impending demise with something approaching equanimity? Adults would have found it difficult, and Robb had been only 12. But she needed help, and Robb was the best one for it. It didn't surprise her that he didn't like to be reminded of her departure from Winterfell. Soon enough, he'd have little ability to comfort her, and even less to protect her. And if there was one thing Robb hated, it was feeling helpless. "It's the truth," she said, and then pressed a light hand to his jaw. "But no, 'twas a twist of my tongue. Let's not fight, Robb, not tonight." Sansa stepped back and grinned suddenly, wickedly. "I'd much rather talk about the Lannister handmaid you were talking to yesterday discovered a new love of lions." "It was just talking," Robb protested. Sansa arched an eyebrow, and he shoved her shoulder. She let herself move with the rough motion and laughed, when he caught her before her shoulder was bruised by the wall. "I'm sure it was, brother." "It was! Gods, you're even worse than Bran. At least he knows when to keep his mouth shut." Sansa ducked her head and laughed again, a warmth pooling in her chest as if she'd drunk sweetened wine. She would miss this when she left. She would feel each mile's distance like a punch to the gut. "If I miss this," she thought, hand wrapped around Robb's arm, head cushioned against his chest, knowing Jon to be there in another hour or so, sword sheathed and grimly watchful. "No, I will miss this, but it will not be a weakness. This love, O gods above, this love shall be my strength." They headed out on a cloudless day, and Jon felt like he might get sick from the pit in his belly. Sansa flashed smiles to Lady Catelyn and Bran and Rickon, bright and half wild, as if she wanted to slice the world apart with its edge. When she turned to Robb, though, her face softened, the look in her eyes was unspeakably fond, and she pressed a hand to his cheek before rising to her toes and whispering something in his ear. The night before, Robb had slipped into Jon's rooms. He'd stared at him, and then sank to his knees in front of Jon's bed. "Be safe," he'd ordered. "Promise me, Jon. I couldn't bear it if you died, if Sansa died. You are coming back, and you are coming back whole, and I will never forgive you if you don't. Swear it, on all the gods we know. Swear it." Jon had gripped Robb's shoulders, had dragged Robb closer, and then hung on with all the strength he had. "I promise on my honor," he whispered. "I swear to come back, on everything I love, everything I have and want. I promise, I swear it. To all the gods, all the demons, every damned Stark that came before us, and all that will come after. We'll come back, Robb." Cersei had never before met a girl so blatantly cowardly. Sansa Stark squeaked in the presence of every last member of the royal family. She went white no matter how gentle any of them were. The only time Cersei had bothered to speak to her, she looked like she might faint. Geoffrey found her disinteresting. Robert had wanted to betroth the two, apparently, but Ned Stark had served some use in his life and decided to decline the offer. Cersei had watched their interactions carefully, and it seemed that the Stark girl was just as quiet and retiring when asked to speak to any Lannister, be it Myrcella, who was a gentle girl herself, or Tommen, who was the softest of them all. The other Stark girl was an idiot. Playing at swords with her brother might have been acceptable in the North backwards, however, that it was, but it would have to change in King's Landing. She spent far too much time with her bastard brother. "Let Sansa Stark try to marry into our family," Cersei thought. "We will eat her alive and send the bones back to Winterfell for her brothers to weep over." The lady did not die. Sansa made sure of it, with Jon tempering the worst of Arya's behavior, and ghosts there to soothe the harshest edges of Nymeria's temper. There was little occasion for Joffrey to go after them, and even less for Nymeria to attack him. And so Lady survived. The Starks brought direwolves to King's Landing, and Sansa took solace in Lady's heavy-breathing warmth when she thought she might go mad from fear. One night, Sansa awoke from a nightmare, trembling like a newborn colt. She drew her robe over her nightrail and moved into her outer chambers, knocking on one of the doors to admit Jon, who stood guard outside. Curled in front of the fire, hours later, she confessed, "I cannot stop dreaming. Whenever I close my eyes, I see them kill father. Whenever I open them, I'm in a nightmare. I want to go home, to Winterfell. You know what we stand to lose? Oh, I should never have." "Sansa," Jon murmured, cutting her increasingly hysterical wonderings off. "Sansa, you've done the best you can, sweetling. You think if you'd just thrown a big enough tantrum, father would have stayed back? We couldn't stay home, none of us, but we're going to do the best we can now. And you'll see Winterfell again, I swear to you." Sansa dreamt that she walked the shadowed, moonlit corridor of the Red Keep. Her ears were sharper than ever before. What might have only looked like black shadows if she were to walk there herself had 1,000 different, glittering shades in it. She heard a voice, low and rasping. "Ned Stark came to King's Landing because Jon Arryn died. He's looking into the death of his mentor, and if you aren't careful, he'll find out what Arryn knew. Distract him, or find something to distract him with. We can little afford civil war right now. The lions will destroy the wolves, and then the dragons will come," replied another voice, strangely familiar. "We've nothing to worry over." "Nothing to worry over? Varys? If it worries you so, bring the Targaryens across the narrow sea sooner. You are responsible for them, not I." And Varys, bald pate gleaming in the dim light, left. Sansa awoke, panting. There had been something there in the curve of her vision, a flash of white hair, a flicker of pale bone claws. She had not been dreaming it. It had been too real for a dream. Too different. but she knew what that white hair belonged to. Sansa had brushed it, had washed it, had wept into it. Lady's fur was as familiar to her as her own hair. I wasn't with her. I was in her. Old Nan's tales flicked through her head, all coming down to one word: warg. Monster, they might have named her, the men of the North if they'd known. Monster, death dealer, luckless daughter of the unholy union of South and North. The North remembers. We are the children of the first men. We are a part of the land, and the land is a part of us. How many have said that father has ice in his veins? How many of our ancestors named themselves wolves? Sansa's hands were trembling faintly. In another time, in another world, she had watched Lady die, and something had died within her as well, something that she had never recovered, even as the rest of her family crumbled away. There is a reason our house sigil is a dire wolf. Gods above, she swore under her breath, and then yanked herself out of bed, still shaking. This changed everything. Lady was her, and she was Lady. And, oh, gods, had Rickon screamed when Ramsay killed Shaggy Dog? He must have loved that black direwolf so much, spent so much time with him, how he must have wept when he was killed. Sansa sank to her knees in front of the fire, chilled to the bone, and she wept, for poor, dead Rickon that she'd buried with barely shaking hands, so used to the loss, for her parents, who never even got a burial, for Lady, who had died for no reason than innocence, but above all for herself, who watched all this happen and remained alive no matter how she wished she weren't. It had been so long since she remembered the old scars, so long since she last mourned. It had felt ridiculous to do so in Winterfell, where her family lived and loved and burned so brightly, but in King's Landing, in the place where she'd been prisoner for so long, it felt right and good. I'm sorry, she thought, and allowed the tears to fall as they might. I am so sorry. I was foolish, I was weak, I know, I watched you die, and I'll never forget it. I am sorry. Ned Stark is looking into the death of Jon Arryn. Make sure he finds nothing. The letter was not signed. Jaime held the parchment to the candle by his bed and knew only one person in King's Landing who curled her letters in that fashion. There was no hesitation when he strapped the sword to his side and followed Ned Stark out of the Red Keep. News came that morning of a battle between their father and Jaime Lannister. Jon heard little of it, only that Lord Stark had been visiting a section of the city that needed repair. Jaime Lannister attacked him with a number of his guards. Jory Castle and his men were dead. Nobody seemed ready to say how. But then came the news that his father had been injured, and Jon raced through the castle to find him. When he arrived at his bedside, he saw a pale Arya sitting beside him, clutching onto his hand tightly. Arya, he said, stepping forward. She turned to meet his gaze. Jon, she greeted, and sounded so empty, so young, Jon nearly cried. You heard? Did the maesters see to him? Yes, she whispered. They say he'll live. Arya's hands tightened into fists, knuckles stark white against her skin. But nobody's saying why he's here. Jory's dead. It was Lannister guards who brought father back, and nobody's saying a single damn word why he's like this. I don't. Jon felt his fingers flex helplessly against the hilt of his sword. Where's Sansa? She saw father here and ran away, Arya spat. I can't stand to see her. How does someone like her belong to the North? Father's here. Father's hurt. What does she have to do that's so important? Don't talk about her like that, Jon said quietly. She might not have your bravery, Arya, or your strength. But she's nice? Arya asked mockingly. She's pretty? She spat the word as if it were a curse. I don't care. I don't care. At least I don't walk away from my father when he might never walk again. Jon sighed and turned away. There was no use talking to Arya when she got in these moods. Instead, he left the sick room and walked to Sansa's rooms down the hall. When he opened the door, he heard the quiet, stifled sound of sobs. Chills prickled down his spine. He rushed forwards and found Sansa in her bedchamber, curled on the far side against the floor, shaking enough for his belly to swoop uneasily. She didn't even look up to see him. "Sansa?" he asked slowly, unease tightening his chest. She looked up. Her blue eyes were filled with tears, and there was such aching heartbreak written across the planes of her face that Jon found himself wrapping his arms around her, tight and close, so that he no longer had to see it. "I did this," she said, voice small and thin. Jon felt himself stiffen reflexively before forcing himself to relax a little. "I did this, Jon. Did you swing the sword?" he asked. Sansa didn't answer, and he went on, "Did you tell the Lannisters to go after father?" "I should have told them not to." Sansa's voice broke, and Jon felt like his heart might fracture with it. "I know what he's looking for. I could have saved Jory. I could have saved Jory. I could have saved the guards. This is my fault. Their blood is on my hands." Jon tightened his hands until he thought he might be able to sink inside Sansa, slip under her skin, and become one with her heart, her blood, her lungs. "Their blood," he whispered fiercely, "is on the hands of Jaime Lannister. You didn't kill him, you didn't hurt father. Chin up, Sansa. We are the wolves of the North, and we will survive." "Survive?" she asked, sounding on the verge of hysterics. "Survive?" "Jon, they killed Jory. Jory, who gave me sweets that time on the road. Do you even remember that? He was a good man, he was a kind man, and Jaime Lannister killed him because he got in the way. He did this last time too, you know? And I just didn't remember." Her voice dried up, and then she said softly, "I just didn't remember." Jon could do a lot. But this was a grief Sansa had to work through on her own. This was something he could not forgive, because it wasn't his to forgive. These were Sansa's demons, the things she had never known to fear, the things that were etched into the lining of her muscles and the insides of her bones. And so he held her, allowed her that small comfort. Sansa might fall apart, might crack open, but he would be there beside her to pick up the pieces. He'd be there wherever she wanted him. Sansa wept when her father woke. She wept, and she wept, and she laughed, too, relief curled under her breastbone. "I resigned from the position of hand," he told them, and she felt almost lightheaded with giddiness. They were going home to Winterfell, to freedom. But then the king came. And then they were staying, and then they were dying. It was a warm day when Jon's world ended. He stood watch in front of Sansa's chambers as usual. Everything was calm, and the corridors were empty as he'd expected. Sansa had gone for her normal morning walk with her septa around the courtyard. A moment later, he heard footsteps rushed but light, quick, and fleet. Sansa turned the corner and almost rammed into him. Her face was flushed a deep red, her hair sticking to her temples and scalp with sweat. But underneath the flush, her skin was pale, and her eyes were over-wide and fearful. "Sansa," he began. She interrupted him, speaking rapidly through her heaving breaths. "Oh, Jon, it's everything, take." A pause, and she breathed deep through her nose before spitting out words as fast as she could. "Listen to me, Jon. Go. Everything's changed. Everything has, oh, damn it." She turned away, and then back, and he saw that the pallor across her skin was as much fear as it was a caged, terrifying need to do something. "You have to go," she said and stepped forward, so close that he could smell the faint lavender scent she used. His heart started to pound hard as well. "You have to leave. Find Arya, take Nymeria and Ghost, and a lady take them, find a horse, go. Go to Winterfell, and don't you dare turn back." "What?" Jon asked sharply. What the fuck, Sansa? You're going. I can't. Father, someone has to stay. There's no time. Find Arya, Jon, keep her safe, and go home. Tell. Sansa's hands tightened on his, nails digging scarlet half-moons into the backs of his palms. Tell Robb I love him, and that I trust him to do what's best. Tell Bran I want him to have adventures. Tell Rickon that I'm sorry I didn't see him grow. Tell Mother I miss her, okay? I love her, and I miss her. Please, Jon, just remember that I will always, always love you. If I don't make it. He choked. I'm not going anywhere. I'm your sworn shield. What's going on? You're not dying for me, she shrilled. I couldn't bear it. You're leaving right now with Arya and the direwolves. Slowly, Sansa inhaled and exhaled, regaining some composure. You're going. Please, I beg you, go home. Jon looked at her, long and steady, and slowly nodded. Something seemed to crack away in her expression when he did. Relief? Worry? Grief? And then she suddenly leapt forwards, arms wrapping tight around him and clutching him. Stay alive, she ordered, and Jon remembered Robb's demand the night before they left Winterfell, could see the things that made Robb and Sansa's siblings, all the warmth and love and vicious, unflagging desire to protect that made them who they were. That he loved and hated them in equal measure. I swear it, he said, and pressed a firm kiss to her hair. Now, you promise me, you survive too! Don't let them break you. Sansa pulled back. For a moment, steel flashed across her eyes, and he could almost see the wolf inside her, the blue-eyed killer, the ice-veined princess who survived what nobody else could have. They won't. It was a promise. It was a vow. It was as close as she could get to one. Jon pressed his forehead to the juncture of her neck and shoulder, and then pulled away. Chin up, he ordered, and saw the way her tears and grief passed behind a mask as coldly beautiful as any sword. Survive, he thought, and knew it not to be an order or a wish but a prayer to everyone and everything and anyone and anything listening. Let her survive, I beg of you. Let Sansa survive. They threw Sansa's father into the black cells. Sansa swallowed her bile and her grief, her fear and her rage. She draped herself in Southron silks, doing the laces up without a maid. She'd gotten used to it in the Arya and then in the north. There had been many days when she hadn't had anyone to serve her in King's Landing as well, so it seemed like a strange sort of remembrance to do it over again, this small, quiet form of independence. Cersei told her to write a letter to Robb. I cannot, she began, only to see the cold, snake-like disdain in Cersei's eyes. Last time, there had been jealousy there. There had been rage and hate, and Sansa had managed to weather it through chance and luck. Now she'd hidden behind shields of fear and useless frippery. She hadn't expressed opinions or desires for months, had curled away and let old revulsion and fear well up in the place of stiff masks. In this world, Cersei Lannister did not fear Sansa Stark. In this world, all Cersei saw when she saw Sansa was the meek, retiring daughter of Ned Stark. There was no hatred there now, only contempt and harsh dismissal. You will regret that, Sansa promised, and reached for a quill. A day later, or a week later, time seemed to have lost meaning here. She wrapped herself up in the brightest silks she had. Sansa powdered her face heavily enough that they wouldn't be able to see the dark shadows under her eyes. She hadn't slept in ages, and it showed in the pale arcs of her cheekbones, the hollows around her collarbone. They mustn't suspect that she knew anything. The Lannisters must not ever even think of her as anything more than a shy, retiring girl. She could not afford for them to see the steel underneath her silks, and so she powdered her face and her arms and let that be another in a long line of masks. In the months she'd spent in King's Landing, Sansa had avoided the Iron Throne almost entirely. Free said she had no desire to be in the same room where she'd been beaten, where Joffrey had shamed her and terrified her, but now she had no choice. And she was smarter now. She was harder and colder. Sansa knew not to ask for things that wouldn't give concrete results. She knew not to ask for open-ended things, mercy, leniency, kindness. No, she knew what to say, and perhaps more importantly, she knew how to say it. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she felt something dig deep inside of her, firm against her fears. Slowly, she entered the throne room. Joffrey reclined on his throne, and Cersei stood beside him, pale-haired, twisted mirrors of each other. Sansa felt her hands twitch, her cheeks pale, but she did not allow herself to falter. In front of the entire court, she swept into a curtsy that she knew was flawless. "My king," she began, voice high and tremulous, "I come here to beg of you for mercy." "For who?" "Your father?" Cersei asked contemptuously, before anyone else could speak. "For the man who proclaimed my son unfit for the throne? There is no room for mercy in our hearts for traitors, Lady Sansa." "I do not know what he did, Your Grace." Sansa bowed her head. Let the court see her trembling shoulders and curved posture. Let them all see that she was just a girl, nothing to fear. "I know not his crimes, but he is my father. And I do not know what he said to you, only that he was ill, that his leg still pains him." She swallowed hard and lifted her head to meet Joffrey's sickly blue eyes. "I beg for mercy, Your Grace. Please allow a maester to see to his leg. Allow him to rest in the rooms under guard, if that is your desire. But I only wish that he would not die while being held prisoner." "Your father is a traitor." It was Varys who stepped forward, and though she never thought to see kindness in his features, she thought there was pity in his eyes. "But still the head of House Stark," he commented. "He is still at the head of a great house. We treat such lords with lenience. We do not offer small folk." "Please," Sansa said. "Please, Your Grace, I beg of you." "Oh, very well." Joffrey waved his hand dismissively. "Take him from the cells." But, and here his face grew hard and cruel, Sansa's heart skipped a beat. "We do not offer the services of maesters to traitors. If you wish someone to attend him, it will be yourself." When Cersei turned on him angrily, he didn't even spare her a look. "Of course, you'll be under guard." "Thank you," Sansa managed. She let tears pool in her eyes, and then she stepped back, let the people step forward, and shielded herself from Joffrey's view. Back in her rooms, she let herself weep into her hands. Relief and another, sharper fear were flooding her veins, and she didn't know what to do next. All she wanted was to sleep, was to run with Jon and Arya, but that was impossible. They were gone and were halfway to Winterfell, probably. She had nobody here to protect her, only someone to protect. Her father was injured. It had been her only reason for staying, to shield him and save him. But what could a single girl do against a king? Against a woman as vicious as a snake and twice as cruel? "We will endure," Sansa thought, and it was desperate. It was desolate. "We will endure, as we always have." When Sansa saw her father, she cried out in both pain and shock. His leg had, indeed, been injured badly, and she could now see the swelling that she'd never noticed before. The Lannister guards had made him walk on his own 2 feet from the cells, and it must have pained him greatly, for he wasn't even limping any longer, only shuffling agonizingly slowly. Sansa ran forwards through the guards, ignoring them, and drew his arm over her shoulder, letting him lean some of his weight on her. He gasped in relief, and she felt her chest ache with a sharp, sudden pain at it. "Sansa," he said lowly, "Sansa, what have you done? What did you do?" And she knew that she was crying, "Oh gods!" soundless, steady rivulets down her face. She opened her mouth to answer, but caught Cersei's eyes across the hallway, staring at them both with revulsion and disdain. If she said something, if she spilled anything, who knew what the consequences would be? Sansa would not let her father be taken from her. Not again. "Let's get to your rooms," she told him through the tears. "Come on, father, only another couple of steps. There's not even any stairs, you know." She kept up a steady litany of encouragements the whole rest of the way, instead of any assurances, instead of any information. The Lannisters had found some measure of kindness in them to offer a room that was, while not next to Sansa's own, somewhat near. She had spent a full afternoon fixing it up with curtains and airing it out to make it more amenable as a sick room. The Lannister guards, however, were unwilling to allow them to stay inside together. One of them stood inside while the others left. Sansa refused to show how uncomfortable it made her to have someone watching while she tended to her father. An hour later, after she'd washed his knee and calf as well as she could, she found that it could indeed become worse. No normal Lannister guard watched over them, but the dead-eyed island pain. She shivered and then decided that she wouldn't let herself be afraid of the dumb brute. Her father needed her reassurance more than she needed to be completely silent in the presence of Lannisters. "You ought to have taken better care," she reproached him gently, wrapping bandages over his calf. "It's going to take a long time to get better, especially if you put more weight on it." Her father looked at her and then dipped away. There was something so sad in his eyes, something she could not address while the guard was there. Sansa tied off the bandages and rose to her feet. "I'm sorry," she was going to say, but thought better of it. Instead, she injected bright warmth into her voice and said, "You'll be better soon, father." Another week passed. Sansa fixed his bandages, applied special oils. She kept her head down and voice quiet. Some days, she sang or read aloud. The guards were always attentive, at first, but when she only sang of Jonquil and Florian and old dead heroes, they appeared to get bored and irritable. Her father didn't speak. 4 hours on end, it seemed, 4 days. He responded to her questions with short answers, and always looked so grief-stricken that she found herself impatient, irritable, and compassionate by turns. Finally, one day he caught her hands when she went to smear rosemary oil over his leg. It didn't achieve anything, really, but it was cheap to get and gave her an excuse to enter the sick room once more, and he asked hoarsely, "Arya? Jon?" The guard stirred. Sansa didn't give any indication of having heard him, turning away to wash the ragcloth in the oil once more. Her father dropped her hands and slumped back against his pillows, and how it ached to see him retreating behind masks and walls once more. Sansa settled back against the chair when everything was finished, and she began to sing an old northern lullaby, a scrap of melody that old Nan enjoyed and hummed whenever she was in the mood. "We cannot be found," it began, "in the place of darkness. Let the skies come crumbling, we are safe." Ned Stark turned to look at her, and she saw the hope flare in his eyes. Sansa could not say it more clearly, could not answer without cutting herself off from him, but she could give him what hope she had. Slowly, Sansa inclined her head, answering his unspoken question. He gave a great shudder and slumped against his pillows. Tension and mourning seeped out of his posture until he looked almost boneless. "Oh, father," thought Sansa, and brushed a hand to his elbow before standing. "I'll see you after dinner," she told him. "Mayhaps we can start walking soon." Jon was many things. He was a brother, a son, a bastard. He was a dutiful man, and a kind one at that. These were things that he had been born to, things that he had no choice in. Of all the things he was, of all the choices he had ever made, of all the ways he had created himself, the biggest was becoming a sworn shield. "I will stay beside you," he'd said, and now he was in the Riverlands and Sansa was in King's Landing still. Arya and he were making good time. In another week, they'd crossed the border between the Riverlands and the North. Jon was glad that she was safe, was so glad that Arya was under his protection, but he could only remember the flame-haired girl he left behind in a viper's nest. When they crossed the twins, Jon made his decision. That night he knelt in front of Arya and gripped her thin, bony wrist in his own. "We'll reach the northern border soon," he told her quietly. They'd camped closer than usual to the castle, and if they weren't quiet would be found out soon. You're going to take Nymeria and Lady, Arya, and you're going to go home. You remember how to get back to Winterfell, right?" Arya's silences had grown longer and longer on the road. The first night, when he dragged her out of the Red Keep and they'd raced away, she had wept and screamed. Now, almost a month later, she had become as quiet and shadowed as a ghost. "And where will you be?" "I have to go back." Jon paused. "Father's still there, and so's Sansa." "Go with Robb," Arya said. She didn't look up to meet his eyes. Instead, she twirled Needle around her wrist gently. "Come back to Winterfell. We can return with an army. We can avenge Jory and all the others they've killed. First, we get them safe. First, we get Father and Sansa out, and then we make them bleed. But only after all of us are safe, you understand? I have to save them. I'm the only one who will, you know that. I'm the only one who can." "Jon," Arya said, and there was anger in her eyes, there was betrayal, but more than anything, there was fear. "You'll make it home," said Jon. "You'll be safe. Lady and Nymeria will protect you." "What can Lady do?" Arya asked derisively. "Choke someone with her ribbons? Blind someone with her shiny fur?" He remembered bruises wringing his throat for a full fortnight, and how hard it had been to hide the evidence of Lady's viciousness from everyone, even with Robb and Sansa helping him. Jon's lips twitched. "You'd be surprised. Now, keep your chin up, Arya, and Needle beside you. There should be enough food for the rest of the journey, so no need to go into towns. And be safe. I'll see you soon, I promise." She was young. It was so easy to forget that, but it was there in the way her shoulders slumped, and she struggled to maintain a blank facade. It was so easy to forget that, but Arya had never liked coddling, so all Jon did was ruffle her hair and keep his eyes steady on hers. "You can't promise that," she whispered, after they'd beaten down the fire and curled up to sleep. Jon thought he might laugh, or that he might cry. He'd sworn so many promises, the question was no longer how to keep them all. No, now it was which ones to keep. "I'll try my best," he said, and Arya's nails dug into the flesh of his wrist for a heartbeat before she turned away. It wasn't enough, his word. It never had been, and never would be. But it was what he had. If it wasn't enough, Jon would make it enough. It was what he'd done all his life, right? "If you can manage your leg like that tomorrow, we can try actually walking," Sansa told her father. It was late evening, almost night. Sansa's chest felt like it was full of sharp, splintered ice. Cersei had been telling her to send sharper and sharper letters to Robb, urging him to come to King's Landing and swear allegiance. They would wait, Cersei told her, for the Northerners to come down and then have the trial for Ned Stark. But with 10 letters sent and no proper response from Robb, Cersei was getting impatient. Joffrey had all but forgotten about them, to all appearances, but Cersei knew and feared Ned for good reason. "Another week," she told Sansa, just before she could go to change her father's bandages. "Another week with no response, and we'll have the trial with or without your fur-laden brother to view." She couldn't communicate this to her father. Sansa had to keep up appearances, had to keep a firm mask and unflagging faith. She would survive this. Her father would survive this. They had to. "Sleep well, father," she said and stepped away, pulling her shoulders tight instead of shivering at the bloody gleam of Island Payne's armor. In the hallways, back to her rooms, she moved quietly, quickly. Inside her chambers, she just lit a candle to light the darkened room when she felt a hand steal over her mouth, another clamp over her wrist. Sansa panicked, and let her elbow bend with the attacker's move, accelerating enough to slam against his breastbone. When he bent over, choking, she twisted out of his reach and drew the dagger hidden in her shoes. She held it lightly and waited for him to reveal his position. But instead of a blind swipe or growl, the attacker lit a match. The flame revealed a painfully familiar face. Jon? She breathed. He offered her a faint smile, and she dropped the dagger, stepped forward, and hugged him, tight enough to make him grunt. What are you doing here? Saving you. He grinned once, silver quick and just as soft. Come on! If we hurry, we can. How did you even come here? What? I told you to. Oh, gods, Arya. Sansa felt horror flood her veins. Where is she? How is she? Why aren't you with her? Jon. She's fine. Jon nodded to the dagger on the carpet. You aren't. I came back. I told you to save her. And I'm sworn to protect you. Sansa reeled back and slumped over the couch. After a moment, she gathered her wits enough to say, if it were just me, we might be able to do it. But father, his leg's still injured. We can't go fast enough. Jon lit a candle on the table nearby and then seated himself next to her. He shifted, so she had no choice but to look him in the eye. Don't worry about that, Jon replied. But if you can figure out a way to get him out of the room he's in, I'd be interested. Aye. She flinched inwards and then hated herself for that bit of weakness. It has to be me. I have to do it, she said softly. Jon frowned and Sansa pressed a cold hand to his. You can't. They'll be wary of a strange man entering father's chambers. But I've been going in and out at all times. They won't think anything of it. His frown deepened. I don't like it. Sansa breathed deep and let go of the acrid taste of helplessness. You don't have to, she said archly. It felt good to have someone with whom she need not temper her tongue, someone who took her sharp words with both humor and seriousness as needed. I'm not just sitting here while you go and get father, Jon said lowly. Sansa tilted her head slowly, thoughts whirling, and then it came to her. The perfect answer. Island Payne's guarding father's sick room, and he has ice. Did you know that? The Lannisters have ice, that's what I knew, but the sword's actually in his chambers. She leaned forward to capture his eyes. And he's not in them. You want me to get ice while you save father? Yes. She hesitated. I'll need to take your sword, the one that you have right now. And there'll be 3 of us on the road. It's best if we have at least 2 swords, right? And ice is Valyrian steel light enough that it won't. I don't like this, Jon repeated, cutting off her babble. Can you do it? Take father out of his rooms, lead him to the dungeons? It isn't a short walk. We'll disguise ourselves. And yes, I can do this. They won't ever expect it. Father can do it. Don't worry about that. They won't ever expect you to punch them. He grinned again and rubbed his breastbone. I'm going to have a bruise, Sansa. You don't pull your punches. I don't know when people accost me in empty bedchambers, Sansa retorted, and then blushed bright red at the humor in Jon's eyes. Not that way, she told him. Jon only grinned wider, and she rolled her eyes. Don't be ridiculous, you idiot. Tell me more about all these people accosting you in your bedchambers, he teased. How many men do I have to strangle before we leave? Thankfully, none. We have to leave quietly, remember? After a moment, the laughter faded from his eyes. Jon nodded and rose, abruptly. All right. Here's where you go. You know where the kitchens are? And the second courtyard, yeah? There's this gate, kind of shadowed. Just keep walking, and you can leave the castle entirely. How did you find out about this? Arya. It was all the explanation needed. She was exploring and found this. When I said I was coming back, she told me to take you out this way. Sansa turned her hands over and over in her lap. The dim light made her skin look cold, look dead. The nails glittered like cold steel. When she looked up, Jon's face was soft and warm, sadness in the shadowy curve of his lip, and somehow, through some miracle, faith in the unbroken line of his brows. Chin up, she murmured, and Jon grinned, wolfish and deadly. Ned felt exhausted. He could barely sleep. In point of fact, he hadn't slept for a full night in weeks. Sansa had been taking care of him, better than expected, in all honesty, but she was only a girl in a nest of snakes. He could see the fear, well worn behind a mask of courtesy. Ned was many things, but he had always loved his children more than anything in the world. To see his lovely, beautiful daughter so afraid, and so afraid of showing that fear, made guilt bubble in his belly like a pot full of boiling water. Perhaps worse than that was his behavior those first few days. Ned had Sansa right in front of him, but Arya never came to visit, and he was sure that no Lannister guard would have been enough to keep her from him if she were there, which meant she was either not in King's Landing or dead. He was sure that she was dead. That Jon was dead as well, because there was no other reason for Sansa to have such fear in her eyes, no reason for her to cringe at Island Payne's red armor, no other reason for her to be so quiet on the subject of her own family. When he finally got the courage to ask, however, Sansa sang a song that was titled Safe. She dipped her head away, and then he saw the stark, naked hope in her Catelyn blue eyes. Suddenly, Ned realized why she was so frightened. She knew they were fled, and for both to have left without anyone realizing, someone had to have warned them. "Oh, my poor, brave, darling daughter. Oh, I'm so sorry. I should have looked after your protection. I should have saved you." The only other question now was why Sansa had stayed. Ned thought he knew the answer, but couldn't allow himself to think it. If the only reason she had stayed was for him, Ned thought he might die from the shame. It was past midnight when Sansa entered his room again. She looked paler, he thought, but that could have just been the lighting. Ilyn Payne straightened stiffly when she closed the door. "I'm sorry, Father," she said, looking apologetic. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I forgot to put the thicker bandages on your leg. It's better if I finish it tonight so tomorrow we can go over walking, yes?" He nodded wordlessly. Sansa moved closer and began to unravel the bandages quickly. Her hands, Ned saw, were trembling very faintly, and she didn't sit as she usually did. But she didn't look up at him, or give him any other indication that there was anything abnormal happening. The thicker bandages she'd spoken of were wrapped tightly around his knee and kept tight enough to make him gasp slightly. It was stiffer than necessary, he thought. Slowly, Sansa rose to her feet. Ned saw her hands tighten, knuckles white against her already pale skin, and then she sent him a faint smile. "I love you," she mouthed and turned away. Sansa felt her heart thrumming, too fast for her to calm, too fast for her to hide the red blush in her cheeks. In Winterfell, what felt like decades previous, Jon had taught her to keep her head calm. He had taught her where to stab a man, how to defend herself, when to attack, and when to defend. But it was Robb after who had lifted her chin to meet his gaze and said lowly, "If it ever happens that you must kill someone, Sansa, there is one thing to know. Don't hesitate. Hesitate to plan. Hesitate to think about it. But once you've made the decision, move with all the speed and all the strength you have, and do not pause until it is over. Until they are dead or close enough." Sansa breathed deep, reached for the hilt of her borrowed sword, and struck. What happened next, Ned did not see. He heard Sansa stumble slightly, a common enough occurrence, particularly when it was this late. He closed his eyes and leaned against the headboard, trying to find a comfortable position. A heartbeat later, someone gasped, and there was a bitten-off cry. Ned stiffened reflexively and flinched upright, and gaped at the sight of his eldest daughter sticking a sword into Ilyn Payne's jugular. He must have struck her. There was already a red handprint across Sansa's cheekbone. But she kept her head facing the dying man, and stepped closer instead of cringing away, to ensure that when he fell she could catch him, likely so that his body didn't make that much noise and draw attention to them. It must have been painful to support the full weight of a man almost a half-foot taller and wearing steel plate armor, but Sansa didn't give much indication of the pain. "Sansa," Ned hissed, "what have you done?" She grunted and slowly lowered him to the ground. Blood had spattered over her face and the neckline of her gown. When she straightened, she looked both afraid and wary of him, Ned realized, with another pang of guilt. I didn't want to, Father," she said. "I'm sorry, but I went to my rooms and John was there." "John?" "Yes, he gave me his sword." Sansa wrung her hands, looking young and vulnerable. "There's a very long story, and I know you'll want to hear all of it, but we have to leave first." "I can't walk," Ned pointed out. A smile stole across her lips, making her look like Catelyn at her most happy, something bright and fierce and sly. Something sharper than Catelyn, actually something that was delighted and triumphant and glorious in its beauty. "Try," she told him. Ned frowned, and then slowly swung his legs over the side of the bed. Hands catching at the bedpost, he levered himself up, leaning most of his weight on his uninjured leg. "Take a step farther," Sansa said, stepping closer, close enough that she could catch him if he fell. When he did, cringing at the memory of pain, there was nothing. Nothing beyond a twinge of discomfort, easily ignored. Ned's head snapped up to see her, and she smiled, full and happy and bright. "You lied?" he asked. "No. I was worried. That was true." She hesitated. "But it wasn't so bad as I pretended. If John had come after another week, you might even have been fully healed." Ned gaped again. When had Sansa learned such methods of manipulation? His sweet, beautiful girl who... Well, Sansa was the girl who hadn't left her rooms in King's Landing in ages. She avoided Lannisters with grace, but avoided them nevertheless. She had changed after that one horrible night in Winterfell, but both he and Catelyn had assumed it to be natural effects of growing. Ned had focused on Arya's louder rebellions. He trusted Jon to keep Sansa safe. Maybe that had been a mistake. "Now come on," she told him. "We have to hurry." She bent over Island Payne's corpse and stripped him of his red cloak. Ned balked when she approached him. Sansa wanted him to wear a dead man's cloak, but all she did was sigh impatiently and thrust it at him. "We have to hurry. If we're caught, the consequences will be terrible. And I'd much rather have freedom, Father, won't you?" Faced with bright eyes and a sharp tongue, all Ned could do was take the damn cloak and, awkwardly, pin it around his neck. Payne was a big man, taller than Ned by a fair margin. His cloak was embarrassingly long on Ned. Sansa tutted when she saw it, but didn't say anything else. She was busy packing some bottles into a cloth bag, and then drawing a dark cloak over her own dark hair. "Come on," she said, and led him outside the room for the first time in months.